'Cause some damn fool accused you of being the best. Dylan! You son of a bitch!
Predator. Who doesn't love Predator? Currently ranking at 87% in audience score on Rotten Tomatoes and the subject of an enduring satirical article on the Daily Mash which claims the film to be superior to Marriage. Predator surely stands as a high watermark of no mess in 80s guy flicks. A sweaty cavalcade of testosterone, muscle tone, man versus what the hell are you face-offs, ballistic excess and big bloody explosions. The film also saw its star draw achieve prime Arniness, a career high possibly only rivalled by the first Conan and the first Terminator films, in which Arnold Schwarzenegger turned in the kind of high-octane action flick that transcends all criticism of the format's admittedly limited emotional range. Snobbery be damned, Predator is pretty bloody great. Well, bookworms, our luck is in. There is a novelisation of Predator, Starbooks 1987, penned by Paul Monette, who'd had previous form on novelisations of Scarface and Nosferatu the Vampire. What can we expect from such a volume? Do we get to know Dutch Schaefer a little better over these pages? Can we expect to become conversant with his motivations, his inner demons? What makes Dutch tick? What makes him the man that he is? Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. We all know how Predator goes. Meat and potatoes, slam bang, bloat lit entertainment with that familiar plot engagingly laid out in a straightforward linear fashion. Well, not everything in life is as straightforward as the movie. Not even the novel. There's certainly nothing untoward about the book's opening, in which we're introduced to the Predator itself, himself, herself, emerging from a state of suspended animation in their interplanetary craft, its various support systems activating and briefing this creature in scientific detail on the biological breakdown of the kind of prey it can expect to encounter on this blue planet which it's slowly approaching. We jump from here to the sweltering heat of the coastline of the fictitious Latin American state of Contamania. The humid haze is abruptly split by the blades of a descending US Army chopper, which is awaited on the ground by General Phillips, an officer of the highest elite of commandos, which is Unit Code 4 Bravo. Before the chopper has even touched the ground, out jumps our main attraction. Massive as a linebacker, yet quick on his feet as a hurdler. His blonde hair was clipped low and his eyes were steel grey and level as a falcon's. Meet Major Dutch Schaefer, Arnie. This hardened combat veteran doesn't yet know why he's been summoned to this godforsaken outpost, but Phillips' presence there makes him suspect that this is serious business. Phillips explains that a chopper conveying 3 cabinet ministers has been brought down over the border, where these high-profile passengers have doubtlessly been apprehended by hostile guerrillas. Phillips reckons there's probably a 24-hour window in which to execute a rescue mission before these muchachos are likely to cut their losses and execute their captives. This is all grist to Schaefer's mill, but he bristles at the information that his tight-knit unit is to be joined by an outsider. Enter Al Dillon, a former South Central LA kid and an intelligence man who had previously shared duty with Schaefer some years before. Dillon's more recent transition to desk job work has evidently left its mark on him, however, and, in a way, he was the whitest man in the room. Well, that's going some. Anyway, Dutch and Dillon's reunion prompts that memorable display of curiously homoerotic one-upmanship under the banner of male bonding, a testosterone-reeking collision of glistening forearms and lingering stares into one another's eyes, none of which, ultimately, breaks down the barriers of mutual suspicion between the two. Dillon's presence on this mission isn't negotiable. He's there to take charge once the objective is reached. Phillips advises Schaefer to get his men together and wishes them good luck. Chapter 2 places us on an assault chopper which is angling low over the jungle with our particularly butch rescue team on board who are busy enacting their pre-mission rituals. Blaine Cooper, 240 pounds of human warhead, is goading his companions with a decidedly unappetising plug of chewing tobacco, starting with Mac Elliott, who's having none of it. Jorge Ramirez, a one-time troublemaker from Houston's Barrio, is meanwhile obsessively adjusting his kit, alongside the freckle-faced South Boston Irishman Rick Hawkins. Lastly, we're introduced to Billy Soleil, the team's scout, part Sioux and part Italian in background, who's described as having the nature, even when relaxed, of a snake under a rock. This little rescue party truly seems to embody diversity in action, and while Mac's ethnicity isn't actually specified in the novel, judging by some of the decidedly dodgy banter in the book, I'd guess he was originally pitched as a white guy, although he's played in the film by Bill Duke. But if you factor in that they're shortly to be joined by a South American lady of a somewhat differing political persuasion to themselves, the story's cast seems to have all bases covered. Is anything missing? Might there be, as in the case of the Wild Geese, an openly gay character in this story?
Looking good, Dutch.
Commando's another story. My cheap jibes about Predator's inherent butchiness apart, it's worth pointing out at this point that the book's author Paul Monette, described on Wikipedia as an American author, poet and activist, best known for his essays about gay relationships, most definitely was, more on which as we go further into this. As our team prepare for 0 Hour, a bid for acceptance on Dylan's part, he's painfully conscious of his outsider status, backfires on him embarrassingly, and he receives a jet of Blaine's tobacco-stained spittle on his toe caps for his troubles. To them, Dylan was a pussy and a cop-out, until proved otherwise. Assembling on the ground in the pre-dawn, the troop move out along a makeshift trail, hacking through flies and foliage before the shape of a wrecked army helicopter becomes apparent. Within it they find the bodies of the aircrew, both clearly having been executed with shots to the head. Billy, meanwhile, has identified the tracks of the guerrillas responsible, who've clearly pulled the prisoners along with them, alongside a puzzling fresh set of tracks which follows in their wake. Billy, along with Ramirez, are dispatched to follow the guerrillas' trail, the rest of the troop falling in behind. Oblivious to all this, the troop pushes on, and as they reach a rocky hillside, Billy breaks away on his own to investigate a crevasse. Suddenly, his instincts, alerted by nothing tangible, flash him an unmistakable warning that something's not quite right. Billy's Native American heritage appears to have given him an advanced level of insight into mysterious dimensions of all kinds of spooky stuff, and he's now on high alert. Cautiously pushing forward, Billy parts a curtain of moss and is confronted by a cluster of screeching vultures, disturbed from their feast on the horrifically mutilated remains of 3 dead men, flayed, disemboweled and hanging upside down from vines threaded through their tendons. Billy, the mercenary who'd survived the worst trench wars, turned away as he felt his throat raw with the urge to scream. Schaefer identifies one of these bodies from its dog tag as an old army buddy and vows bloody revenge on whoever rigged this atrocity before confronting Dylan with the dog tag and demanding to know what this man was even doing there in the first place. Dylan claims ignorance, but Schaefer's not satisfied with this. Mac, meanwhile, declares that this is the time to unleash Old Painless, a 6-barreled M134 minigun, in reality not a weapon that ever entered production, adapted for field combat. Billy, meanwhile, is rooting around and deduces that a perplexing all-directions firefight had taken place on this spot. And still there's no sign of the missing politicians. Payback time, declares Blaine, as they determinedly hit the trail, eager for some reckoning with the culprits. A short trek takes them to the crest of a hill which overlooks a seemingly makeshift guerrilla camp in the trees below. Closer inspection reveals this camp to be something more than makeshift. The weapon systems on display appear to be rather over-sophisticated for this particular location, though the camp seems to be only lightly guarded. Even as they survey the camp, the troop witness the murder of a hostage, which galvanises Dutch and company into moving quickly. Even as they stalk towards their prey, their glowing forms are registered by the sensory mechanisms of our curious predator, who's still attempting to get the measure of what these men are all about. Billy goes in first, sliding towards a reefer-toking sentry who, contrary to best military practice, is listening to Billy Joel on a Walkman. "Beware of rock and roll, man. It'll turn your brains to mush," advises Billy. having plunged his combat knife into the slacker. From here, it's pure bloody mayhem as the troop unleash hell on the rebel camp, blowing the shit out of everything and everyone, at no cost to themselves except for a shrapnel nick to the impervious Blaine. It quickly becomes apparent that Dillon and his CIA buddies have lured the team to this location under false pretences, conning them into wiping out this rebel encampment and to bring back valuable military intelligence that the capture of this outpost would yield. This doesn't enhance Dillon standing with the platoon one jot. While a small gaggle of surviving rebels flee into the bush with Billy and Ramirez in pursuit, there's one solitary survivor, temporarily knocked unconscious by a beam, still on the site. This turns out to be Ana Gonzalez, beautiful with a tawny complexion and thick black hair, whose sensuous mouth is pouting defiantly even while still unconscious. It turns out low-life commie revolutionaries are somehow redeemable when they're kind of hot. We're allowed a little bit of background on Anna, at least to the extent that she's had a pampered background and of her apparent naivety in becoming involved with any cause that differs from US foreign policy. That said, they need to get out of there and reach the pick-up point in double quick time, and Anna is clearly going to be problematic baggage during this process. Since Dillon is arguing that she has to come along for intelligence purposes, Dutch lands Dillon with a responsibility for her, the superior officer now in no position to pull his rank or argue. It turns out that she's every bit as defiant as that pout of hers might suggest, and Dillon is going to have his hands full with her. Billy, meanwhile, is covering the platoon's rear. His mystical Sioux instincts are going properly into overdrive. He senses something other than human is watching them, and indeed our predator at that point is morphing into a vaguely humanoid form and tracking the men's progress with its heat vision, scientifically attempting to assess these creatures' fundamental nature, simultaneously practicing his newfound technique of vocal mimicry while grasping its weapon, a spear-like device in contrast to those impressive laser blaster gadgets of the cinematic counterpart. Every other creature in the jungle has already tuned into its presence, except for the men other than Billy. No wonder the temples had overgrown. The Mayan tribes had vanished without trace. Has this thing been here before? Anyhow, Billy at this point is properly spooked, tapping into a trance-like dimension in which the true nature of their stalker is fully revealed to him. Fainting at the extremity of this experience, he collapses into Schaefer's arms. On regaining consciousness, Billy struggles to explain to his officer this vision of a god creature and its apparent connection with the ruined Mayan temple foundations beneath their feet. Schaefer has a lot of respect for Billy's instincts, but he has no patience with this metaphysical stuff. Okay, Tonto. Tonto? That's enough. Meanwhile, Dillon has somehow managed to palm Anna off onto Ramirez, who totally underestimates her continued feistiness and receives a crack on the head and a kick in the knackers as she makes a sudden escape bid, careening off into the bush with Hawkins now in frenzied pursuit. None of this goes unobserved by our predator, who's now itching to get involved. And just at the point in which Hawkins corners Anna, this terrifying apparition materialises out of the forest. Hawkins perceives too late the complete change in attitude that has overcome Miss Gonzalez as she glimpses this figure over his shoulder and is swiftly dispatched by the predator's blade, before being dragged off into the undergrowth, witnessed only by the cowering Anna, who is now terrified out of her senses. The rest of the squad, meanwhile, still failing to grasp what it is that Billy's been trying to explain to them, are summoned by a breathless Ramirez and set off to find Anna, who's clearly traumatised beyond any further notions of escape. There's no sign of Hawkins. Bewildered at what might have happened, they comb the area to find a pile of discarded entrails and the tracks of something large and three-toed. This is so far beyond their combined experience. They press the now deflated Anna for answers, only to learn that the jungle came alive. A further search reveals Hawkins' remains hanging from the ankles, much as the earlier victims had been. The reality hits home now. One of their immediate, previously invincible brotherhood has become the victim of whatever this is, and it's evidently something more serious than terrorists. Blaine, of course, is still tied to his traditional methods and is positively itching to cut loose with old Painless. As he scans the bush, he's called out to in Hawkins' voice, and to his further astonishment, a gout of blood then erupts through his shirt as the predator swiftly dispatches him in a manner which causes 100 Mayan priests to sigh in their graves. Alerted by Blaine's cry, Mac rushes to the scene, only to catch a fleeting glimpse of a two-legged something racing off into the trees and a pile of offal that had once been his friend. Recovering from his gag instinct, Mac empties his magazine into the trees. The rest of the team swiftly join him and unload further munition into the alien's approximate direction, a grenade fragment causing nothing more than a minor gash to the creature. As the noise subsides, the remaining team members become aware of their sudden vulnerability. Their dozen wars suddenly amounted to nothing. Their massive kills and their awesome bravery and luck were as meaningless as the random swarms of bees that floated in the deep of the woods. An attempt to booby-trap the approach to their temporary camp backfires badly, with Mac becoming embroiled in a fight with a wild boar, and in the confusion, the real intruder extracts Blaine's remains from their body bag and makes off with the trophy. They conclude that their stalker must have been using the trees to approach. At this point it's clear that in their present plight all notions of political conflict have become irrelevant, and Anna has become, if not an ally, at least a necessary collaborator in the quest for survival. And while she still can't clearly describe what she witnessed, she reveals that she's been carrying a smear on her trousers of what must be the creature's blood, leading to that memorable conclusion, if it bleeds, we can kill it. From here on out, as with the film, the team, in their increasingly desperate attempt to make it to the pick-up point, are picked off mercilessly one by one with horrifying inevitability. A further attempt at rigging up a booby trap momentarily ensnares the creature in a suspended net. A striking scene in which the alien's grotesque semi-humanoid form is momentarily revealed to the horrified team, who are too stunned to immediately react with much effect. Mac, still enraged by Blaine's loss, pursues this fleeting figure off into the forest, to be joined somewhat unexpectedly by Dylan, who redeems his standing with Schaefer with this act of self-sacrifice, which naturally doesn't end well either for himself or for Mac. Now in open pursuit of the survivors, the Predator then dispatches an already damaged Ramirez, and Billy, now feeling an almost ancestral compulsion for a face-off with this creature, nobly sacrifices himself with a gutsy one-to-one confrontation with this brute. Schaefer, having propelled Anna off in the general direction of the chopper, has to execute his own evasion tactics, which culminate in an unscheduled plunge to the torrent in a gully below, where he eventually deduces that the doggedly persistent alien has failed to detect his now mud-caked form. Armed with this information and the very few modern-day accoutrements left at his disposal, Schaefer locks into some brutally primitive warrior mode, entering into a tense cat-and-mouse stalking dance with the Predator, which eventually sees the Major, against the odds, gaining the upper hand. Having critically damaged the creature with grenade shrapnel, Schaefer dogs this now cornered creature, by this point more frightened than frightening, back to its craft, where the Major is momentarily halted in his tracks by the spectacle of multiple flayed human skins. Even the fucking Nazis didn't do this. Before the alien attempts to re-enter its craft in order to bail back out of this increasingly hostile planet, the creature is, at this point, skewered by its own discarded spear, which has been hurled by a relentlessly vengeful Schaefer. The business end of the instrument not only splits the Predator's head apart, but it then buries itself deep into the craft's circuitry, which triggers a chain reaction that's an effective countdown to a violent explosion. An explosion which fairly batters the hovering army chopper that has picked up Anna and is now scouring the landscape for any surviving members of Schaefer's troop. As they gulp at the devastation which the exploded craft has left, they perceive a barely human, primitive-looking figure standing naked and alone, smeared with mud and haemoglobin. It's only thanks to Anna that the G.I. Joes aboard the helicopter uncock their guns in a realisation that this figure is in fact Major Schaefer. He's promptly hauled on board, where a rapturous Anna, all ideological differences now dissipated, throws her arms around him and covers his bloody chest with kisses. Steady on, Anna. General Phillips is anxious for explanations, but Schaefer has little to say, staring instead into the coming dawn at the conclusion of his own private war. I'd imagine that many readers, expecting a straightforward narration of the film's plot, would have come away from this book somewhat perplexed and perhaps even a little disappointed. While Monette's narration is a capable bit of writing and maintains all the requisite tension and thrill factor, the plot divergences from the film are all too noticeable in this book. Consensus seems to be that the explanation probably is that Monette would have been given an early version of the script to work from, a script that would subsequently be rehashed and improvised until the Predator we know from the film had taken its final form. As a result, the novel has become a sort of parallel storyline, with enough familiar landmarks to tie it in with the film, but numerous sidesteps from the definitive plotline. In that sense, the book is probably more an interesting curiosity for Predator completists, rather than a truly necessary acquisition. However, perhaps there's another level to this. Paul Monette would go on to become an acclaimed author and an activist, chronicling in his later works both his personal experiences and the ravages that HIV wrought on his community. His book Borrowed Time, an AIDS Memoir, would be published within 2 years of this novel. While his adaptation of Predator may not strictly fall under this remit, the dedication within the prelims to Roger Horwitz, Achilles was not such a warrior, nor so mourned by his comrade in arms. Horwitz was Monette's partner, who during the period of Predator's gestation had fatally succumbed to the virus. While Monette wasn't actually the originator of the Predator storyline, that's credited to screenwriters James E. and John C. Thomas, he cannot have been oblivious to certain parallels that can be drawn between the story and the nature of the HIV virus. There's the concept of this sneaking, unseen, unsuspected alien presence, this merciless stalker whose intent is utterly destructive. Monette even likens the alien to a virus at one point in the book. There's the idea that this seemingly impregnable group of the most robust men, all at the peak of physical fitness and highly attuned in their survival instincts, are not for a moment imagining themselves to be in any way vulnerable, and yet all but one falling prey to this creeping malignance. All this surely must have resonated with Monette as he completed his task. It's never quite spelled out, but at the end, where we see Dutch silently engaging with a kind of homage to the men he'd lost, I'd guess that beneath the somewhat hawkish tone of this novel, these coincidences with Paul Monette's own personal experience may well have shaped his treatment of the Predator story. Paul Monette himself would die from HIV-related causes in 1995, having established as part of his legacy the Monette Horwitz Trust, an organisation dedicated to the eradication of homophobia. And I'll leave you with a nice quote from the man: "Go without hate, but not without rage. Heal the world." Amazing what avenues a cheap, pulpy action film adaptation can take you down. Dans la jungle des